A quiet carpenter refused $1 million offer. Then the truth about the old house came out. Roland Vance stood on the porch steps waving a certified check in the morning light and said, $1 million for a shack, and you're saying no? Elijah Freeman didn't look up from the porch rail he was sanding. Dust drifting off in a slow gold cloud. His palm flat against wood his own hands had shaped for 3 years straight. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's window curtain moved an inch. This wasn't the end of anything. This was the moment right before the whole county learned what that house actually was. And nobody standing on that lawn knew it yet. A voice cut in, quick and unimpressed, the kind that talks over the cold open, before it's even earned the silence. $1 million and the man still said no. Y'all better sit down for this one. Elijah had grown up 2 streets over, in a house with a bucket under the roof to catch the drips. And every summer his grandmother Odessa Freeman walked him past the old clapboard house on Larkspur Lane and said the same thing. That house belonged to your great-great-grandfather. Freedman built it with his own 2 hands the year after emancipation, and it stood through everything this county's thrown at it. Don't you ever let it go for less than what it's worth. What nobody on Larkspur Lane knew, not Roland Vance, not the crew hammering up fences 2 lots over, was that Elijah wasn't just a carpenter restoring his family's house on weekends. He'd spent 4 years quietly earning a license as a land title examiner, working nights at the county archive, tracing his family's deed chain back through 150 years of paper, because Odessa had asked him to make sure no one could ever say the house wasn't theirs. He told no one at the job site. A carpenter with sawdust in his hair draws less attention than a man who reads deeds for a living. The first rung came the week after Elijah refused the offer. Roland stood at a town council meeting and said, loud enough for the whole room, "We've got a squatter on Larkspur Lane playing handyman, holding up progress for the whole block." Somebody in the back row laughed. The second rung came 3 days later. City inspectors Roland had called personally slapped 4 violation notices on Elijah's porch posts in a single afternoon, bright orange paper stapled where every passerby could read it. No permits requested, no time given to respond. The third rung came the following week. Elijah's business account was frozen without warning, a lien filed against his tools and truck by a shell company, tracing back to Roland's development firm, claiming an unpaid debt that had never existed. Elijah stood at the bank counter, reading the notice twice, jaw tight, hands steady on the counter edge. The fourth rung came on a Saturday morning with 2 television cameras present. Roland's crew rolled a fence line across Elijah's driveway, and Roland stood in front of the cameras and said, "This squatter's had his last week on county land," and had 2 men physically walk Elijah off his own porch steps while the cameras rolled. Across the street, an elderly neighbor named Miss Corinne Dabney sat on her porch glider, watching every second of it, saying nothing out loud, her old flip phone propped against a flower pot, recording the whole thing in silence. Elijah didn't raise his voice once. He picked his tool belt up off the grass, buckled it back on, and walked to his truck without looking back, spine straight the whole way. A voice broke in again, sharper this time, refusing to let the moment pass quiet. "Somebody explain to me how you get cameras out for a man defending his own front porch, and no cameras for the 4 notices, stapled up like a warning sign. Somebody explain that." The following Tuesday, a county car pulled up to Larkspur Lane, and a woman stepped out in a gray blazer, carrying a leather folio thick with paper. Denise Okafor, the state historic preservation officer, who had flagged the property months earlier for an emergency title review, after an anonymous archive clerk noticed a demolition permit moving through channels far too fast for a structure of that age. She was looking for the deed holder of record. Roland came around his truck smiling the smile he used for anyone with a title, and said the house was condemned, the matter was settled, nothing left to review. Officer Okafor didn't raise her voice. She asked one question: "Where is the current title examiner of record?" Miss Corinne Dabney rose slowly from her glider, walked across the street with her flip phone held out flat in both hands, and pressed play. Roland's own voice, unmistakable, saying, "Squatter." And last week on county land, to a porch he had no legal claim over, the video already time-stamped and dated the morning it happened. Roland's smile didn't move for a second longer than it should have. Officer Okafor watched the clip once through, then opened her folio and said, "This parcel was registered to the Freeman family in 1866, under a Freedmen's Bureau land grant, and it has never left that family's name. Your permits were filed against a deed that was never yours to develop. By Thursday, the county had opened a fraud investigation into the shell company lien and the forged demolition filing, and Roland's development license was suspended pending that review. The city inspector who had rushed the violation notices through without a proper site visit was quietly moved off code enforcement within the month, transferred somewhere with no cameras and no porches. Roland was made to stand on that same porch, in front of Officer Okafor, Miss Corinne, and a small crowd that had gathered by then, and say, "I'm sorry if my company's process caused you inconvenience." It was the kind of apology that apologized to no one at all. Elijah asked directly if he had anything to add, looked at him, and said only, "You didn't take my house. You just made the county read the paperwork," and turned back to sanding the rail he'd been working on the day it all started. A year later, the house on Larkspur Lane still stood at the corner it had stood on for a century and a half, freshly painted, a small bronze marker now fixed beside the front steps, naming it a county historic landmark. The settlement from Roland's fraud case didn't go to Elijah directly. By his own request, it was redirected into a county preservation trust fund for other heirs' property families, fighting the same kind of forged claims. The first grant already approved for a family 3 streets over. Odessa Freeman sat on that porch the day the marker was unveiled, hands folded in her lap, watching a grandson she'd raised on nothing but a warning about never letting go, standing in front of a house that finally, on paper and in fact, could never be taken from them again. A voice closed it out, warm now, no longer sharp. "Look, this one's fiction, all of it, made up front to back. But you know how many real Larkspur Lanes are out there right now, families getting pushed off land that's rightfully theirs, because nobody read the paperwork in time. So here's the actual question. If that were your family's porch, would you have signed for the million? Or would you have stood your ground like Elijah did? Tell me in the comments. Like this if you'd have said no. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because this isn't the last story we're telling.